Good evening. My name's Evan and welcome to Rocklin Graves. James Wan is responsible for a cinematic universe I certainly never expected. When he released The Conjuring back in 2013, I'm sure he also wasn't expecting it to become the long-running franchise that it would. Wan's been responsible for a few modern classic horror movies, and one that I feel has been sort of buried by the weight of The Conjuring is Insidious. I remember my dad sitting me down to watch this around the time it came out, and it scared the shit out of me. I distinctly remember spending most of the movie behind a pillow, and while Insidious isn't nearly as well known as The Conjuring, it has a very special place in my heart. I can almost guarantee that you've seen this before. That's Insidious, and honestly, the first 3 entries were solid. I thought Insidious 2 was decent despite some really goofy moments, but Insidious 3 was fantastic from what I remember. It has been a while since I've seen it though. The 4th film was a huge step down, and since 2019, the franchise has lain dormant. Until now. While I found The Last Key to be the worst in the series by far, I was excited for the next entry when I heard that it would be Patrick Wilson's directorial debut. I've just always really liked the dude. He seems like a very humble, creative guy, so I was looking forward to seeing what he would be like behind the camera. The 3rd and 4th movie left the Lambert family behind to explore other stories in the world, but The Red Door takes things back to where the series started and acts as a 3rd chapter for the family's story. James Wan didn't have a hand in the creative side of this one, but Leigh Whannell did return with story credit for a script written by Scott Teems, who also co-wrote Halloween Kills. I love Halloween Kills. The script is not the highlight, so this was slightly concerning.
I'm an innocent woman. Just like your sister was. It was Halloween night. She was in her bedroom.
The film picks up 9 years after the events of Insidious 2, which saw Josh and Dalton voluntarily wiping their memories of what happened in the first 2 movies in the hopes that if they forgot about the further, they wouldn't travel there anymore. Things have been quiet for nearly a decade, although it's clear that what happened back then has done a number on everyone involved, even the ones who don't remember it. When Dalton starts college, the things from his past return to haunt him and the nightmare soon begins once again. I was looking forward to this movie, but I honestly went in with pretty low expectations because it was Patrick Wilson's first time directing, and Scott Teems tends to write very on the nose, but at the very least, I was hoping that this movie would remain faithful to the tone that made the first movie so good. I'll start off by saying that in terms of Patrick Wilson's direction, he shows that he definitely has a grasp of how to build suspense and handle a camera. There are a few scenes where you can feel him teasing you with a scare that everyone knows is coming, but he does a good job at building it up in a way that you're just not sure when it's actually going to pop, which is something that James Wan is very good at. It's pretty clear that the years spent working with Wan had an effect on Wilson's ability behind the camera, so I'm really excited to see how he works as a director going forward. There were some great scare sequences in here and some not so great ones, but the highlights were strong enough that it makes me really excited to see what Patrick Wilson will do in the future. There was a bit too much reliance on jump scares, but that's something that the first movie employed a lot too. I think it's all in the execution. There were just a few too many here that didn't feel earned. Outside of scares, it's a generally good-looking movie, but it was missing that cold, low-saturation look from the first 2 movies that I was really hoping to see make a return. That's part of a bigger issue that I'll get into more detail about in just a second, but before I do, I want to touch on how cool it was to see the Lambert family on screen again. Seeing Dalton and Foster grown up and played by their original actors was a fever dream, and despite limited acting experience from both of them, they were serviceable in the roles. Patrick Wilson has this great on-screen charm. It's more present in The Conjuring than it is in Insidious, but the dude just has such a great screen presence. Rose Byrne also returned as Renee, but both her and Andrew Astor as Foster have very limited screen time and don't really get to do much. This movie focuses a lot more on Ty Simpkins as Dalton and his relationship with his father, so those two get most of the screen time. Insidious is not a super popular franchise, but I have such a soft spot for those first 3 movies, so no one wanted The Red Door to be good more than I did, which is why what I'm about to say brings me no pleasure whatsoever. This is an extremely shallow movie, even with my low expectations I had going in. Shallow was the word in my head when I left the theater, and I think it fits almost every facet of this movie. Legacy sequels seem to be touching every single franchise at this point, even if it doesn't make sense to return to where things started. I was confused about what else there was to explore when this movie first got announced, and I think my confusion was warranted now that I've seen the movie. Most of the movie is spent on Josh and Dalton trying to figure out why they can't can't remember a year of their lives and why there's spooky ghost things happening to them, but because we're already well aware of the answers they're looking for, it makes it really hard to stay engaged with the story. That was a really weird angle for this movie to take, and it resulted in a lot of wheel spinning until the clunky third act that had to conclude the Lambert storyline. What's frustrating about the end of this movie is that we pretty much just end up back where we were at the end of Insidious 2. The story here feels really unnecessary outside of one or two little details that get added, but I think those things that were added were better left unanswered. There aren't many new characters introduced in this movie, which is fine, but the movie doesn't explore the legacy characters well enough, and then it throws in one paper-thin side character who is just an irritating caricature of a liberal arts student. Insidious movies have always had humor in them, that is not the problem, but there's a way that Wan handles humor in horror that feels a lot more fun and natural. Tucker and Specs are genuinely two of my favorite comic relief characters in horror. Their back and forth one-upping each other and unrelenting reverence for Elaine was great and blended in with the movie's tone without being cringe-inducing. The humor in this movie is not handled anywhere near as well, and that's the kind of thing that I was concerned about in regards to the script when the movie was first announced. So the characters are underutilized and shallow, and the story adds little of substance, but does the movie manage to do the one thing I wanted it to do and go back to the tone that made Insidious unique when it first came out? No. One of the things that's so compelling to me about Insidious is that cold, dreamlike tone that gave the movies this creepy and otherworldly atmosphere. That's entirely absent in this entry, and I think there's a few contributing factors. The color grading was a big part of it. The first two movies in particular have such low saturation that some shots almost look black and white. But I can't just blame the grade for the lack of atmosphere. Insidious 3 had a more traditional look, and that movie was still great, so it's gotta be more than that. What's really missing is the omnipresent sense of history and mystery that added so much to the first movie. There's a lot going on in the background that you need to be paying attention to notice, and the things haunting the Lamberts had this very old, creepy feel that gave a strong sense of history and depth to the hauntings. Each ghost had a very distinct look and behavior that added a lot to the tone, and that's something sorely missing in The Red Door. I was really excited to see that Joseph Bishara was returning to score the movie, but even that felt lacking compared to what came before. Go back and listen to some of the music from the first movie if you haven't done it before, and from the first track you'll know what's up. The Insidious Plane is one of the most chilling opening tracks I have ever heard in a horror movie, and I was hoping to get that same sort of feel here, but it's just not there. There are so many things that are characteristic of Insidious that are just flat out missing here, and I think the most egregious example of this is the way that the Further is handled. The Further was extremely important in the first movie and was portrayed as this uncanny, ghostly mirror of our world. This shit was so creepy and unsafe, and you just never knew what was going to be through each door. It was cold, dark, but most importantly, it was interesting. In this movie, the Further is just a blue, foggy version of the college. That's it. It's the best example of what I meant by this movie feeling shallow. There aren't any memorable and unique moments like that creepy family in the living room, and the movie is just lacking in that distinctiveness overall. As a big fan of the first movie in particular, The Red Door felt like such an unnecessary return to the Lambert family out of pure necessity as every franchise tries its hand at a legacy sequel. I remember feeling like the series was spinning its wheels a bit after the second movie, although the third was a nice surprise, and this latest entry just reiterated what I already felt about the series being squeezed of all it has to offer. There were a handful of moments that worked and gave that nostalgic feeling that a legacy sequel is exploiting. Seeing these characters together again gave my nerd brain a jolt, and there are some genuinely good, tense scare sequences in here, but the movie overall just felt pointless. The main thing this movie left me with was an urge to revisit the first few entries to get that great atmosphere, sense of unknowing, and the fun side characters. This trio is legendary in my books. I don't think this is a terrible movie, it's just really flat and lifeless. It leaves the family in a nice spot, which I appreciated, but that's already where I imagined them ending up after Insidious 2, so this didn't really change anything about my headcanon, but that's entirely anecdotal. A few solid scares and some little treats for fans was nice, but I don't see myself revisiting this movie anytime soon.
I feel like I'm getting closer to something, or something's getting closer to me.
I only own the first 3, and I don't even know if I'll be adding this to the collection. I think it's time to put the series to bed, and Blumhouse, if you really want to give one of your franchises another shot, do Sinister, and not with that dumb crossover idea between that and Insidious. Sinister 2 didn't bomb because there's no interest in Sinister movies, it's because that movie was shit. Anyway, I'm starting work on some videos for October now so that they're actually done by the time they need to be out, and soon we'll be taking a look at The Exorcist as that movie awaits its legacy sequel. Until then, thank you for stopping by Rocklin Graves. I hope you've enjoyed your stay.